All right, so this is gonna be a morbid video, but I've got to tell it anyways, and it's not like anything specific that's um, gruesome details, but it's sort of a deathly topic because it literally has to do with death. And my thoughts on it, and thinking about doing it to myself, and so on. If it weren't for the hope that my ex-girlfriend comes back and rescues me from poverty, I would have overdosed on fentanyl by like 4 times the lethal dose 2 years ago at least by now. Like I just would have gotten fentanyl and just overdosed and hidden away and died alone and so on. The only reason why I continue is because I hope that my ex comes back, basically, and she rescues me from poverty as well. Um, or possibly in about half a year or so, I get a new computer and I can play good or newer, not necessarily good and newer, so to speak, at least. If you know, you know. Video games, and just entertain people and sort of have a better quality of life than a laptop with 512 megabytes of virtual memory, or VRAM or whatever, graphic card, basically. To be clear, 10 years ago, a good gaming PC had 4 gigabytes, or about 8 times what my current computer has for memory, for virtual or visual memory. So, I'm kind of stuck playing old games and stuff like that. And it's a bit slow at times and all that. But, anyways, you know, kind of like getting something that would perk me up and like actually sort of satisfy me a little bit, maybe. And like, maybe I could entertain people and like calm down and lighten up a little bit and so on. Or my ex-girlfriend comes back and she rescues me from poverty, and then I can lighten up. You know, um, I have difficulty with personal and societal improvements. I've tried the personal progress thing with this channel and my Rumble channel for 3 years before that or so, and I'm just not getting anywhere. And I know it's kind of like no one wants to hear someone complain or whine about it, but like, maybe I'm going about it the wrong way or something like that. But regardless, the point is I'm failing at personal progress. So basically, that means I'm reliant on society's kindness to survive and maybe have comfort and so on. And society in my area is not doing very well. It's sort of like living under the sword of Damocles, which is like a sword hanging over a seat, with like a tiny little string holding it up that could snap at any moment. I don't even get to rule or have a great deal of comfort for that level of threat. So it's like, okay, I don't get the massive comforts of being like a tyrant or a king or something like that. And yet I live in a position where I'm just as tenuous in my well-being as one of those. Anyways, so that brings us to the morbid part, or the more morbid part, which is, I'm thinking about it, right? And one of the things that I've thought about is, even if MAID becomes available legally to my situation personally, if I choose to go out, I'm not going to do MAID, I don't think, after all. There's too many horror stories about people who are like choking to death over 8 hours, fully conscious and paralyzed and miserable and suffering like crazy before they die. Contrast to my friend who survived but overdosed on fentanyl a little bit and had to have CPR done to him and so on. And his response is he didn't have any regrets about it whatsoever. It didn't feel bad in the slightest. Maybe his chest was a little sore the day after or something like that, but during the event or during the overdose, he was just blissfully happy. And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, well, the logic is really simple. The drugs MAID uses, or because I'm Canadian, so MAID is the term for that, medical assistance in dying. The drugs MAID uses are probably way more expensive than fentanyl, because you can get like a good dosage that gets you high for like $5. So like, it's like, who cares? Just 4 times that and you're dead. And it's like, okay, if you're going to kill someone and they haven't committed horrible crimes against humanity and so on that make you want to torture them to death, unless you're a psychopath that wants to torture innocent people to death anyways, then why not just give them fentanyl instead of these expensive drugs that lead to drowning while paralyzed for 8 hours until you die? You know what I mean? Like why not just use fentanyl? Like, you're killing the person. What's the argument for not making them happy if you're going to kill them anyways? If they're not guilty of horrible crimes and so on that you need to punish. Right? Like, what's the argument? It costs less money to use fentanyl, and fentanyl is all over the place. You could probably just go, down the street and buy the fentanyl and then, like, have them eat the powder or something like that, for $20. And it would be like they just lie down and they just get the best feeling of their life before they die, And it's like, and maybe for the hardcore drug addicts, if they sign up for MAID, then like 8 times or $40 of fentanyl, But like, you don't need all this sort of like special equipment and all that jazz. Except maybe you want to inject the fentanyl or something like that, so that it's not like powder flying all over the place and getting people contact highs and so on. So it's liquid form or something. But like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, what's the point of using more expensive drugs that hurt the person when they're dying? It doesn't make sense from a avoiding suffering standpoint. It doesn't make sense from a money saving standpoint. Like, both of those are against the current system of MAID and for just using fentanyl. Now keep in mind, I'm for the death penalty for people that commit the most horrible crimes, but I'm against MAID generally on principle. One of the reasons why I am so angry with the left at the moment is that they seem to want power while admitting they suck so bad at managing society's resources that they need to kill people off to save money. So, death and dysfunction and corruption are the hallmarks of the left. They want to kill the disabled, they want to kill babies, they want to kill the elderly, they want to kill veterans, like Sargon and Connor Tomlinson basically said it best, they're a death cult. And it's like, okay, but why do you make people suffer when they volunteer for death to avoid suffering? You know what I mean? It just seems like it's like you're torturing them whichever way they turn. And why are you doing that? You know, you either torture them to death with the current system of MAID, or you like torture them with minimal resources and maybe being housed barely and not having a lot of money left over at all, like any money basically, or like they're not homeless and they can only afford drugs and not a place to live. You know, and it's almost like they're hoping people take drugs and overdose when homeless because they're disabled. And it's so like it's so evil. Like it's not even like you know what I mean? Like it's more insidious and disgusting than like Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords who tortured people to create a utopia where people did not commit crimes, you know, like actual wrongdoing, I guess, on some level, in a situation where people were doing immense crimes, you know, so it's like a law and order position, and what they're doing right now with the drug addicts and so on is anarchy and neglect of the disabled on top of it. So like, you know, and the thing is, it's not like this system is actually normal. It's not normal. It's not what existed for the previous 9 years or so before the socialists got into power. And it was not like the previous 10 to 15 years before that, even. You know, it's not like anything that's really happened in since 1960 or something, or 1970 maybe. You know, it's not like that. It's so wild and disgusting and destructive and dysfunctional. It makes me want to scream and like, okay, I'm not saying I'm actually going to do this. You know what I mean? But like part of me wishes that there were no such thing as police, so that these people responsible would have to defend themselves, because I know they can't. And then the crowds who are mistreated would come for their heads and so on. You know what I mean? Um, it's like that horribleness and so on. And I know for a fact that for all of my savagery and harshness in my declarations and my rants and ravings and all that jazz, that I am in line with the vast majority of human societies in the West, at least Christendom, when they faced anything remotely similar to what I'm facing now. The people in charge right now are the freaks, historically speaking. It's not even like a king and peasants, because peasants could at least afford a family, and I can't. You know what I mean? It's like, oh well, we had an election, therefore we can we can destroy civilization because we were voted in. You know, it's like that's not a king and peasants. The king is responsible for the peasants. You know, and like the thing is, the peasants, they might not get a lot of welfare, but they weren't prevented from being able to function, working, basically. You know what I mean? It's just really bad. It's horrible, you know. And I hate it. You know, like like income tax is like 54%, 55% at the top bracket. And someone who makes double what I make on disability, which is not a lot of money, maybe it's 23,000 a year for me, and someone who makes 55,000 gets taxed half their income through the various taxes, including income, gas, carbon, sales, and I think a few other things like property tax or something like that. Um, you know, so someone who makes 55,000 is getting something like 28,000 a year left over, or 27,000 a year left over, and I'm getting 23,000 on disability. And then about 12% of that gets, or 6% of that gets taken out, and the rest, and half of it gets taken out as rent. So it's like I'm using 11,500 a year, or 1,000 left over, and that's Canadian, which is approximately 700 or 750 American, or like 800 pounds maybe, or something like that. It's not necessarily a lot. I'm not sure how many pounds it is necessarily, but like, you know, um, if I were to, eat peanut butter and bread alone with every $1,000, it would cost about $150 per 4 weeks. Whereas before, when I was making $750 to $800, because I could actually work because I was in a safe enough neighborhood, in a nice neighborhood that was good, in a good apartment that was twice as big as mine, with more utilities and so on. I could eat like a kilogram of ground beef every day for $250 a month, every 4 weeks, or something like that. Um, you know, like that's, and today it's like a kilogram of beef is like $15 for half the kilo, or something like that. Or it's just insane. It's like 4 times the cost, yet I've only gotten 1/3 the money more. You know, um, and that's the sort of Damocles I'm talking about. It's like a ticking time bomb that I'm stuck with. It's like one of those situations from the movie Saw, and I'm not sure what I did to deserve it. You know, that's what the left represents. They're basically the crazed madman who is like, you stepped on an ant when you were 12, and therefore you've got a bomb set on the back of your neck with a clamp around your neck and so on, and you have to cut your own head off to escape or something. That's what the left basically represents to me. Towards people like me. You know, and this would not happen under a Christian society. It wouldn't happen. This is totally anti-Christian. This is godless heathens and miserable Satanists' vision for humanity. They're going to start with people like me, and they're going to start with, oh, it's voluntary, quote unquote. All they're doing is just making it so we can't afford to live, so that we, quote unquote, choose made. It's literally the mafia. I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse, kind of thing, through torture until we volunteer to die. And they're gonna bring that to more and more people as time progresses. I guarantee it. So if you don't stop them now, they're going to keep doing it more and more people, or they're going to die painfully and so on until there's nobody left. That's the left. They did it with communism, they did it with Nazism, They're doing it in China. It just doesn't stop. The Aztecs did it. The human sacrifice, kill the babies to save the planet or save a woman's future in her career. Sacrificing a future to save the future. you know. And I don't mean like you give up something that's kind of valuable to get something more valuable. I mean, you sacrifice your very children for your sake. And the left encourages that. That's what abortion is, for the most part. Not always, but for the most part. Like 75% of the time. And the left want to sacrifice the veterans, the elderly, the disabled, and the babies. Anyone who isn't a worker ant for their profiteering off parasitizing everyone is to die because we're competition. And they can't run a society well enough to include the rest of us, those four categories, in taking resources from the workers because there's just not enough money because they mismanage production, growth, and prosperity attempts to the point that they literally just can't afford to allow us to live and for them to take huge amounts of money so they can virtue signal about how great they are that the rest of us are dying.